Check. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Right, everybody, thank you so much for showing up today. Hangovers in tow, I am sure. Thank you for that amazing talk there. I think I would be probably described as a LARPing mop as I sit up here with these guys right now. Can I have a show of hands? Who actually gave one single fuck about privacy before they come to Bitcoin? Yeah, not bad. Who did not give any fucks about privacy and doxed themselves all over the internet for most of their adult life before they came to Bitcoin and now are regretting everything that they've done in the past? Probably most of the room. So we're going to go around. You guys introduce yourself first, and then we'll get into some questions. I might just open it very early to Q&A because we've got a bunch of guys in here that probably got much better questions than myself. But we'll see how it goes. So we'll start with you, Douglas, and quick intro and tell us what you do and why.
Hi, I'm Douglas Bakkum. I invented a hardware wallet called the Bitbox, and now I created a company to develop it called Shift Crypto. I'm the CEO now. So moving away from the, what was the first one? The creators, unfortunately.
I'm Peter Todd. I've spent a lot of time on things like Bitcoin Core and so on, reading about other people's ideas and then criticizing them, which is a remarkably large part of what security is, because you can't test your way to security. You got to look at something and find the little tiny flaws that we never find by chance.
Some of you might have seen my intro before, but my name is Roger Walsh. I work at Swan Bitcoin as an engineer, but my reason for being on here is that I spent 10 years in the police, and including the last kind of period I was in what's the equivalent of the Secret Service at home, taking care of the Prime Minister. So I guess I'm the guy speaking about physical security here today, and if you're interested in seeing that, I've given a few talks about this topic on a few other conferences.
Literally a Fed.
Hi, my name is Pavol Rusnak. I am the co-founder of Satoshi Labs, the company behind Trezor, which was the first and still is the first hardware wallet. And I've been in Bitcoin since forever, and I'm also the author of BIP39 and some other standards that are being used by literally every software and hardware wallet out there.
All right, thank you. Now, who out there is going to be brave, put their hand up and ask a question, rather than just sit there slinging shit on Twitter like we saw this morning? Anybody want to throw their hand up and ask a question of this panel whilst you have them? There is one over there. All right.
So for anyone really, but Pavol especially, how important is it that open source software is MIT licensed rather than GNU licensed?
Rather, you said MIT or what? What's the other option?
From GNU license.
He means GPL.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really depends on what you are trying to achieve. Bitcoin is a good example. Satoshi chose an MIT license because they wanted everybody to use the software, while we have chosen GPL license for Trezor because we also want basically everybody to use the software, but we also want to people that are building on top of our stack to also publish all of their changes. So there is like a limitation to what you can do with the source, but I think it's a good limitation because it's a good intent behind that. Another example is, for example, 95% of JavaScript libraries are MIT licensed because creators of these libraries probably want them to be used by closed source companies, and maybe they will get hired by companies that are building closed source. But this is really not my intention with Trezor. I don't want my code to be used in closed environments, so this I have chosen the more strict license.
I mean, Actually, maybe a quick question. I'm kind of curious. What percentage of the audience knows the difference between MIT and GPL licenses? Like, raise your hands. Yeah, okay, half-ish. I mean, maybe I should quickly comment. So, open source, of course, is where you go give away your source code. MIT is where you give away with no conditions. GPL is where you give away with a condition that if you're going to use this and redistribute it, you should also give away your source code. And this is why I would say I think it's a real problem that the security industries in the rest of the open source community in general is moving to MIT licenses because, you know, we need that kind of viralness to go and keep software open. You know, it's a real problem that, like, a lot of the stuff on my phone, there is no way to go get the source code to it. You know, there's no way to go see what my phone's actually doing. And, you know, I think, like, Satoshi probably made the right decision in releasing Bitcoin as MIT for that adoption, but there's real advantages to GPL too, and I think as a total, our security posture everywhere is lessened by it, so.
Maybe just a small addition, since this is a Bitcoin conference, and I hinted that MIT might have been a good choice for Bitcoin. And imagine if Bitcoin used a license that would make it impossible to integrate Bitcoin code into exchanges. So is it a good thing and bad thing? I mean, you would be able to trade a lot of altcoins there, but not Bitcoin.
To be clear, the way GPL works is you can use it in closed source software, such as an exchange backend. But if you were to then redistribute that exchange backend to someone else, GPL forces it to be open while MIT doesn't. And, you know, we actually don't see that as much as we used to because, of course, these days software as a service is such a big thing. You know, like, how often do you go and buy a copy of Exchange source code? Like, basically nobody does that anymore. It's always a hosted thing that you're using. So it's, you know, it's a different world than how GPL kind of came to be.
Yeah. There are even more drastic licenses like AGPL that make it even worse for people using that even if they are integrated then in a mixed environment, they would need to publish any source touching that. But I think we are really in the detail right now, and we might roll up back.
I see you nodding your head in agreement, Douglas. Anything to add before we go on to the next question? No?
No, I think they covered it quite well.
Not my area of specific expertise, I would say.
Great question, though. Thank you very much. We already have another hand up down the front here. This is working well.
Thank you. I'm always worried about attacks, especially covert attacks. So I'd like to know if there's any way that a user can make sure that something like reuse of nonces is impossible in a hardware wallet. Can I verify that the hardware wallet doesn't screw up the nonce so they can derive my private key from a transaction I signed? Is there any way?
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe we should explain quickly, like, what the significance of this is.
yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah. Oh, so basically speaking, so the way the digital signature system in Bitcoin works, and believe me, I'm glossing over details here, but basically speaking, you have to go come up with a random number as part of the process of making a new signature. And if you don't come up with a random number, you can reveal your private key, and, like, all hell breaks loose and you lose your money. And this is really hard to go audit because how do you know that the hardware wallet internally is actually creating a random number? It's tricky.
Yeah, and basically, at least to my knowledge, there are like two different approaches how to solve the problem. And one of them is using deterministic nonces. So there is like algorithm that describes how a nonce should be created. And you can verify that the hardware wallet is actually using that algorithm by two steps. First, you need to have an open source hardware wallet, such as Trezor. And then you need to have an environment that is able to deterministically build the software so you can actually verify that the binary distributed by Satoshi Labs is actually coming from that source that it's claiming to come from. And this is the approach we use. But also there is another approach to introduce like more complex protocol, which is called klepto protocol.
Yeah, anti-klepto.
Anti-klepto protocol, and this is something that Bitbox uses, and I guess Douglas is the best person to describe how it works.
Yeah, I can try to describe that. So another way, so I guess to rephrase the attack is, with this random nonce, this random number, you can actually leak secrets out through signatures. And your signatures are on the public blockchain. And so that's available to everyone. And so you can't leak out the whole secret, you can leak out little bits, but over time you can leak out different bits of a secret and actually exfiltrate your seed onto the public blockchain. And the attacker would put little markers on it so they know what's wrong, or they know where to look to get that. And so there's a technique that's been developed by some engineers in our company, along with, I think, with some engineers from Blockstream, to basically add, so there's cryptographic magic here, but basically from the software app, you can add an extra nonce, and when you get the signature out through cryptographic magic, you can prove that this was added to the nonce. And so by doing this, you're adding in a source of randomness that's not linked to the attacker, and you can basically bypass this attack.
And maybe I'll quickly speak to, like, I think the wider, like, sort of social context of this, where what's tricky with these types of attacks is, you know, the way the community as a whole defeats them ultimately comes down to you have to somehow force the use of open source software, and also you have to somehow get enough people interested to actually go audit it. You know, have I personally ever bothered, like, getting my Trezor, which actually I don't use for various reasons, but, you know, getting my Trezor and actually doing all the work to verify that it works the way I claim? No, I mean, it's a whole bunch of work, and chances are it does work, and, you know, it's hard to incentivize people to actually do this stuff. You know, academics seem to go do it sometimes, but they seem to rely on underpaid grad students who often don't really understand these issues, and it's you know, it's tough in a community just to build an interest, keep auditing things.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. I know at Trezor ourselves, we have bug bounty programs. So if there's anyone out there who thinks they can hack our hardware wallets, please do it. We'll reward you. So try it. And yeah, this is the challenge. We make code, we make it open source, but the big part of making it open source, like you say, is people should verify it. So we want you to verify it.
And actually that was the main reason why we came up with the idea for the hardware wallet, because me and Slash, we were and we still consider ourselves as a software engineers, and believe me, we didn't really want to create a hardware wallet, but since we were trying to solve the problem of self-custody, we realized there is simply no other way than just creating an environment that it is possible to audit. I mean, not everybody is forced to audit it, but at least there is a possibility that a single person can verify both hardware and software. I mean, the Trezor firmware is around 100,000 lines of code, which might be a lot, but it is doable. I mean, a person can audit probably single line of code, every single line of code in maybe a year. But compare it to, like, Android operating system or Windows, which has hundreds, millions lines of code. It's just impossible to audit, and we wanted to provide this rather small environment, which is doable to audit.
Regil, I want to bring you in here because obviously we have hardware makers here. You are working at Swan, where you are probably trying to educate as many people as you can for the reason to self-custody and to buy one of these devices. I'm hoping we're going to get 100% hands up. Who owns a hardware wallet of some sort? If your hand's down, take note. So how do you go about that? Educating the people that you're being onboarded at Swan and getting that message across, which you were kind of talking about in your talk there.
Yeah, I mean, I think our company's objective is to try and target the newcomers, or perhaps we lean a little bit towards some of the less educated people in the space, or at least we provide the ability for those people to be taken care of, which I think is something that most of these the Alcon exchanges, they don't really have that kind of customer focus, if you like. But it's also an important part of, as you alluded to, that this education is more than just a way to sell Bitcoin to people. It's a very important part about the future of the ecosystem, because if a significant amount of the economic activity happens on centralized exchanges, people don't self-custody, then effectively Bitcoin has been captured, you could answer. So yeah, you know, we have a real focus. I mean, we definitely have a lot of customers that are, some of us spoken at this conference, that don't need our advice on the stuff. They're relatively well advised. But, you know, I think it is very important, something that we do offer for any of those of you out there that do need that we are able to provide somewhat of that concierge service to people. And I think it is a very important thing, because these fundamental principles about, you know, as we've been talking about with open source licenses, but also hardware wallets and many other things, you know, it's this culture of security, which is something which I feel is quite lacking in Bitcoin. You know, certainly given my professional background, people are a bit lax in some ways, which I find interesting, but it's understandable. You know, these are normal people. But I think, you know, making a real effort to make that part of our mission and to educate people about that is something that's very important, and that's something that we try and push. So come to us at Swan if you need advice.
Excellent. And I think that the question on everybody's lips, to air gap or not to air gap? And I see Douglas, I think we're going to pass that one over to you. First of all, Peter, actually, would you explain to people that might not understand what we're talking about, what air gap or not air gap is? And then Douglas can get into that. And we're going to have NVK online to, you know, live from Canada.
So you asked me to explain it also. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. You go for it. Yep.
So stealing my thunder a little bit, I actually have a talk at 11:30. Hopefully I'm on time on the other stage, exactly on this topic. But yeah, air gap. So hardware wallets need to communicate with a computer or mobile phone. There's different ways you can communicate. One is just with USB. Just plug it in. Very straightforward. That's what we do. That's what Trezor does. There's a concept out there called air gap, which is not using USB. They say that there's a gap of air between the computer and the hardware wallet, and that could be either, there still needs to be communication, and so that can either be through micro SD cards being transferred between the two devices, or QR codes, so like photons through the air, through the two devices. And yeah, there's some belief in the field that this adds security. In my talk, I'm going to argue that that's maybe a bit more questionable. I'll stop there for now.
You know, I mean, pre-Bitcoin, I actually worked in analog electronics design, you know, at actually a geophysics startup. And funny enough, I did actually go build a literal air gap at one point to go transfer power through, you know, a couple hundred watts worth. So, but, you know, I think like air gaps, the whole discussion around it, I think it often misses bigger factors like, you know, if you have a wire between your hardware wallet and your computer, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The question is, how did you design that wire? Which can get down to, you know, depending on what your threat model is, can get down to really subtle issues like, well, like how much current? Well, you know, how many electrons literally per second are flowing through that wire, and how fast can that number change? And one of my earliest Bitcoin talk posts was actually a bit of analog electronics design, talking about how, well, you know, one of the ways that a device can leak information is by how much power it's consuming. Because as it does some hard crypto operation, it uses more power. And then when it stops doing that hard crypto operation, it uses less. Well, often the length of time that it's doing that hard crypto operation is dependent on the secret data. And now you have a problem. Well, what's one way to go and do the important part of an air gap? It's to go and do some, you know, electronics wizardry to go make sure that that amount of current stays the same. And, you know, there's lots of details like that, but I don't think it's like just to go say, oh, we'll use an SD card. I'm very dubious about that kind of talk because, you know, what's an SD card? Well, an SD card these days is an entire like 32-bit microprocessor, and they've got amazing amounts of complexity. Like, I'd much rather see more places just go focus on, you know, what's a simple design that we can really go argue as well as also probably in the usually more important case of, well, where did the hardware come from and so on. You know, frankly, I personally don't bother using hardware wallets. I'd much rather go buy a, you know, used laptop from somewhere that's very unlikely to be specifically targeted, you know, and then go put a clean OS on it. And I mean, literally, you know, I go put a tiny little laptop in a safe.
Yeah, okay. I think the whole security debate has so much nuance, and people have only like 10 seconds of attention span, that it really comes to boiling down like very complex stuff into very simple statements, like this is air-gapped, this is not, this is secure element, this doesn't have secure element. And I think there is a lot of complex explanations to be done, but we simply don't have time because people just stop listening. Maybe you stop listening already. But what I wanted to say that, yeah, I agree with Peter that SD card these days has more computing powers than my first computer, and also there is air-gap and air-gap. So I think that if we are talking about air-gap, we should be talking about electromagnetic shielded air-gap. So for example, printed QR code is air-gap, or maybe infrared. You might remember it from the 90s. It is like sort of air-gap, but filling with SD cards, I don't consider that an air-gap. And also, when it comes to the topic of USB, yeah, people might be arguing, yeah, there are these bad USB attacks, but actually they got it a little bit wrong, because bad USB is about a device attacking your host, not a host attacking your device. So actually, I'm more afraid to plug in SD cards into my computer than using it for any other reason, because I'm afraid that this SD card might exfiltrate some data from my computer. So yeah, I mean, this is one point, and the other point is, I think we should be thinking about like security threat modeling, and I think that a security threat model of a regular person is very different to security threat model of Edward Snowden, for example. And what we are trying to do is to tackle the problems of 99% of the people. But if you have a three-letter agency that is coming after you, I agree that you should be using something very, very different than off-the-shelf hardware or off-the-shelf hardware wallet or something else.
Yeah, if I could just chip in one thing there. I mean, I think we have the, pardon me for putting it this way, we have the electronic part of security, I think, well in hand, or relatively well in hand, compared to some of the other issues to do with some of the physical, not so much physical attacks, but physical issues, but also user education, right? Like you're saying, like it's all good and well having, you know, a great hardware wallet, but if people are too lazy to use it the right way, or they never bother to do it, or it's too complicated and so that it just sits in a shelf and it stays on Binance or something like that, then, you know, then it's all for naught, right? So the security battle is more than simply the technology. It's the user, and it's also the meat space is a very important part of it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that education is very important, because you can have as secure hardware wallet as possible, but then a user receives an email that says something happened to your hardware wallet that is locked in your drawer, but better to enter your seed words into this fishy looking website, and that they will happily do so, even though their hardware wallet has been unused for 2 years. So we have to educate people. And I think that a lot of people that are advocating for more complex hardware solutions are really diluting the debate up to the point that the very important points are getting lost in discussion.
This is why I keep on telling people who aren't really sure about this stuff, look, do you have an old cell phone? Just put a Bitcoin wallet on it and get it off Binance.
Any other questions out there? Straight away, young lady here in the front row. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I wanted to ask, when you're looking at the current state of Bitcoin security, what do you consider to be the kind of hardest issue that we should be focusing on, but we're not really, that we kind of derailed? And what is, according to you, worth like focusing on? What's, according to you, like worth focusing on, and we are not really like focusing on?
Yeah, but the question was like, what is the most pressing issue of security we should be focusing on, but we are not really focusing on because we are focusing on some other crap.
I can go if no one else does. I mean, kind of linking to what I said before, again, you know, I'm hesitant to say that we have the electronic side of things well in hand, but I think relatively speaking, you know, that's not the biggest of our problems. User education, but also, you know, one thing that I think is, since the last time I talked about this topic here, that has become more and more of an issue is, for example, you know, the ledger hack and other companies, and also some other third-party providers, you know, like Klaviyo and HubSpot and some people like that have been hacked. You know, think about the fact that it's all good and well having your hardware wallet taken care of, but you know, if it comes to someone coming to your door or whatever it is, you know, how are you going to handle that issue? And that's something that I don't think that we're really thinking about, because, you know, if there is that honeypot there of people's personal information, then, you know, it can be used. I think there's a lot of talk about these strategies, but people, I think Jameson Lopp gave a very good talk about this, I think it was 2018 here, about some of these things. One of the most practical ways that people should be dealing with this stuff, which I did look through the Ledger leak, and very few people seem to do this, very easy to open an LLC or a company, or even sometimes just using a mailbox will suffice, but using some of these kind of shell entities, if you like, to be able to satisfy the legal requirements for identity that these people need, but also to provide some distance between you and your personal information and what these companies have, is something which I think is very underutilized in the space. Also, you know, like, it's just as simple as, you know, most of these people want a utility bill and they want something to legally prove your address, but that doesn't have to be where you are actually living, and there's many ways, if you're clever about that, about how you can provide some space between you and your physical location. So, you know, one thing I think a lot of people should have the threat model in their head, that your information will be doxed and it will be out there. What does that mean for you? And if you're uncomfortable with that situation, if you haven't got that well handled, there's this book called The 36 Stratagems. I don't know if you've heard it. It's kind of like The Art of War. It says, of all the 36 ways to get out of trouble, the easiest is to leave. And I think that's kind of what I'm speaking to here, is if you just remove yourself from the thing, it's better than building up an army or buying a ton of guns or whatever. So think about how you can create some distance between your personal details and whatever is passed on to these companies is a very practical security tool that's relatively easy to accomplish.
I saw a meme, I think, on Twitter. I don't know who posted it, but about the $5 wrench attack. And the best way, it's now like inflation, is it? But the best way to beat the $5 wrench attack was to buy a $10 wrench. But,
Exactly.
So speak to Rigel after.
You're not going to win that game, especially when, I mean, I think if you've seen what's happened the last couple of years with COVID, you know, you've got to get real that, you know, it might have seen pretty Alex Jones before, and it may not be in the way that you anticipated, but, you know, the state level stuff is not some crazy idea, or it may be also taken into mind of, I know some people that have this problem of, I'm smart, I've got my words hidden in some other country, but now you can't get to that other country or get out of your own country, you know. So, you know, it's important to start thinking about these things, and I would like it not to go in this direction, but looking at some of the economic mayhem that's happening now, it's not out of reality, so do start having that conversation with yourself.
Maybe I'll go answer that just from a like software and hardware developers' point of view. The one that, you know, really concerns me, and of course it's well known, but like very little is actually done about this, is ultimately the supply chain attacks, where, you know, I mean, you know, people in the audience may not understand this, but like when you go write software, the way it actually gets turned into the bits that the CPU executes is through compilers. Those compilers use libraries, and it's kind of like, you know, having this gigantic factory of an enormous number of industrial robots that are, you know, taking your instructions and turning it into software at the other end. But these systems are so insanely complex, it's basically impossible for someone to go audit what comes out the other end and verify that it actually did what you thought it did. Which means that we have to somehow audit the machine that does this and make sure we understand what software went into our software. And unfortunately, like, we're going backwards on this. You know, there used to be more, for instance, PGP signatures on software. So you could say, all right, this really came from who I thought it did. And that's disappearing now as so-called security experts in the community try to go push against this and create systems like, you know, Rust Cargo, where you have these gigantic thousands upon thousands of packages And it's hard, these things tend not to go refer to each other cryptographically. They refer to each other by, version number. What does 0.1.0 mean? Well, you're really trusting third parties to turn that into the actual software you're running. And this really needs to improve because, even if you're using a hardware wallet, it's very easy for the people who make the hardware wallet to accidentally screw up by allowing one of their pieces of software that builds all this stuff to get infected by something that changes, what they thought they were building to something else, such as code that steals your software. And, these problems are just going to continue, and we're already seeing a bit of this. And it's such a major threat that's something that, because these build systems tend to get used in very wide parts of the ecosystem, you could have hacks through this that, steal billions of dollars at a time. And these are the things that can undermine confidence in the entire system.
I think there is one topic that is neglected a lot when it comes to security, and it's it's nice to have your Bitcoin secured, but in the end you probably want to use them, or maybe might want your children to use them. And if you make your setup very secure and complex, you might either shoot yourself in your foot. That happens a lot. Like I remember a lot of users are, for example, not writing their seeds in the correct order, but they try to be smart and shuffle the order, and then they screw up because they don't remember. Or even worse, like they make so complex setup that it's completely unreachable by their children in case they die. And Josef had a really nice talk yesterday about Shamir secret and inheritance. So basically the idea there was that you should try to document your setup, so even a person that is reading the instructions and can't interact with you for whatever reason can reconstruct your access to Bitcoin. And this is something that a lot of people are neglecting because they are really excited about how smart they were about securing their Bitcoins, but they don't really realize that problem. And there might be something like unexpected, like the obvious unexpected thing is that you die, and this is something that might occur in your head, but we have seen cases recently when people from Ukraine had to leave their countries like at 4 a.m. and then they moved to Czech Republic, and then they realized, all right, so I have my treasure in Prague, but I'm still stuck in Ukraine because I'm a male and I cannot leave. So how do I deliver the passphrase to my wife without sending it via unsecured channel, be it a SMS or a phone call, and we don't use PGP. So this is something that is not really on the top of your mind when you are creating your setup, and your secure setup should be should stand the test of time. It should be usable even in 10 years' time, and 15 years' time. So you shouldn't try to come up with your own solutions. Just use one of the battle-tested solutions.
So, like, your memory is not as good as you think it is.
No.
If you do something even remotely complex with your setup, and then you go back in 5 years to go and get your Bitcoin, there's a really good chance you're going to forget what the heck you actually did.
Yeah.
Upstairs there's a whole bunch of hardware seed storage solutions. One of the things that bothers me about them is you get all these things they're fancy, they're made of metal, but there's nowhere to go label them. What is this?
Yeah. I can give some expert advice here also. So I actually have a PhD in neuroscience with a focus on learning and memory. Just don't trust your brain. Just don't. It's not going to work after a while.
Guys, I'm getting the shut it down face from Stefan here. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for these guys for all the hard work that they are doing to keep our Bitcoin safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, gents.